if you go to a gallery and you really like something touches you, good or bad, you know, like you write that in the book. And if people come to the gallery and they really, and I say, well, don't tell me, write it in the book, because it's not the same as an artist after a week saying, how's the show going? I say, oh, this person loved it and this person said it was amazing. That can be quite not as transparent or honest. I'm like, put it in the book, because I think that it's important to have that feedback and to know what you're doing. I remember when we like every sort of end of year kind of Christmas, we'd send out like a small edition that we'd ask each year. I'd have, you know, like these cards that you might get, like a complimentary slip with the artists and the gallery logo and stuff on it. And every year I'd give an artist and like send them 60 and say, kind of do something with those, and we'll send them out as like to our clients and our community. And you send stuff out and then you don't hear anything back, and then like 6 months later you'll go and someone's framed it in their house or some. Oh, I love that, it's one of my favorite things. And I think artists too are often sending out a book they made or something, and no one writes. I think it's important for someone to say, wow, that book, I really like it. So I think in that vein,
I mean, it's a question of some form of, I think, generosity. That's why people respond to interest, right? When someone expresses interest, it's actually quite rare. I think the point is, it's actually quite rare.
I think it's rare, and we need more of it for some actual feet, just some some compliments, or I don't know. But also what I was interested in was what you said was that you seem to understand. Well, also we've never met, so there's someone that contacts you that actually has been following what you're doing, and you don't know who they are. And maybe there's hopefully tens, hundreds, thousands of Markos, but a dear friend and a mentor, Fred Dewey, who sadly passed, but he ran a literary center in Los Angeles, Beyond Baroque, as many other things. And he was always saying, when we were talking about kind of running institutions, that you know, when you're doing them on a small scale, that you're always too busy fixing the toilet or the internet to articulate your story. And I think that often your process or story is also unfolding in real time as you're doing. So I felt that this was an opportunity to articulate my story. It's a bit of, sorry, because it's about Fred. Sorry, I got a little we're actually, the exhibition that we're hosting at the moment with Jeremiah Day, there's a lot of Fred in that. And actually, when we opened the show on June 2nd, that was 2 years, the anniversary of his death. Anyhow.
And Fred was based in Los Angeles.
Fred was based in Los Angeles, but then he came to Europe. He was in Berlin, between Berlin and Brussels. He really embraced somewhere like Brussels because of its kind of multicultural, or let's say, like you could fly a freak flag, you know, and you were embraced. I think that's what a lot of international people feel about London, right?
Yes.
Same-sex couples walk down the street holding hands, whatever you want to do, you feel like you can do it. And I think Fred, mind you, I've never been to LA, but you think LA kind of embraces that too, right? But maybe not. I don't know.
LA is a weird place. You get like a palm readers at every corner. You know, like, you know, that it feels like a place where people go to, you know, make the dream come true. But so actually there's this whole like layer of the city which is just telling you, oh, you can do it, you know, you're great.
Yeah, that's the problem, with UK too. Right? I was thinking when you said every corner, because it'd be interesting that, like, you go to one corner, if you're dissatisfied with your direction, you can just go to the next corner.
To the next one. No, I think that's exactly how it works.
Yeah, because I suppose I was only ever into magazine astrology when it was like, oh, you're gonna like, this is your babes, this is your okay.
But the way I came to discover the gallery was actually through almost like journalistic work a couple of years ago, when I was looking at emerging and established subjects in the art world. And I found the gallery just quite profound in its approach, yet I found very little about you. I don't know why.
I mean, maybe like Fred said, I was always too busy fixing the toilet and the broadband. Or at the same, because when I started the gallery, I had a full-time job. So you wake up at 4, 5, you write whatever you need to write, until 9, 10, then you go to work, and then so you're just constantly running, just doing finger in the dam, you're just doing the stuff. So, but also maybe it was the process of doing what you do to understand what it is you're doing. To actually, it's easier to reflect. Of course, it's important to have strategies and business plans and to map something for the future. But like making an artwork, if you know what the end thing's going to be, for me, that's not an artwork.
No.
You get like Jasper Johns, you take something, you do something else to it. It's got to have this process of not knowing really where you're going. But maybe that's the complexity of it, maybe, is that you kind of need a strategy to know where you're going, but you need to take the kind of because I certainly didn't have go to a particular school or university where you have a network in that way, or that I didn't grow up, all my mates are postmen and builders, and I don't, that's where I come from. So, and my broad Cockney accent is smoothed, so I think there's a bit of imposter syndrome maybe to start. I think
you've done it for a long time now.
Sorry?
You've been in it for a long time.
Yeah, for sure. But I think it is that thing of not having the time, because I do look back and think, okay, you run the gallery on your own, so you had the job, and then the full time, and it was 5 days a week, then it was 3 days, and then you make a bit more money, and then you have this thing, a bit like a kid on bike with stabilizers, and then I remember in 2013 was that moment of taking the stabilizers off. I can run this gallery on my own with the income from but maybe I didn't value enough that connectivity which you talk about now. Not value it, but maybe even understand it, because you're just close to the thing that you're building, but at the same time understanding it as it's happening.
But at the same time, the gallery is the connected thing. I mean, the gallery does have a community and it is connected to the world. So do you think that was maybe your agency?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure quite what that is. I mean, essentially, initially wanted to do it. It was more about autonomy. It was about spontaneity. It was about doing what you wanted to do when you wanted to do it, and also that's why it started as a private company, which it still is. But it could have been a public institute. For me, the thing of having a private company was the autonomy to walk into an artist studio on a Monday and say, and there's a moment of just someone's onto something, and you're like, well, we need to do that in 2 weeks. And actually to have a strong enough community with the gallery where whoever's got the show is to phone and say, can we swap? Can we, where you can actually do that, where institutionally sometimes you can't. So it was to have that sort of flexibility to be able to do that.
Okay, I think we'll get to maybe those questions again later. It does feel like you're on some form of transition at the moment.
Yeah, it's a classic COVID new normal. I think it was having 2 years, because in February 20, we were at Arco in the art fair, And that all of those stories from the globe were unfolding. And in fact, me and other colleagues, you're kind of doing like, you're sort of like, what the hell's going on? And then and at that time, we were kind of building, it was the best art fair I'd had for a while in terms of my turnover. And all of that came out of planning what we were going to show, why and who. It came out of this very strategic, because maybe in the early days, you just turn up somewhere and you're like, you just bang on the wall and you hope for the best, and it doesn't work. So this was like years of planning and strategy and things, and it really worked. And we had, the plan was to come back because I wanted to grow. And for me, growth and investment, I'd always struggled a bit with that because it was a lot to do with extraction, and neoliberal ideas of growth weren't my ideas. I was like, growing doesn't have to be bigger and more. But that was the mode that I was in pre-COVID. So after Arco, I had arranged like a big dinner to invite artists, professional colleagues, and potential investors. So I had this kind of strategy planned out that was going to happen late in March and I even sat down with my wife, Anna Barham, who's an artist we also work with, to sort of, because it affects your family and life. And, I was ready to sort of put on the suit and play the game a bit more. And luckily COVID happened and I didn't do that. So I just sat at home reading Naomi Klein, Noam Chomsky, a lot of repatriation, decolonial, like I just was reading all of these political books. And I wanted something different than that. And I think COVID, so what happened also was that we came back, I opened a show and we were opening, and we had a joint dinner with Hollybush Gardens. And all that day, the news was unfolding and you're phoning, shouldn't we open? What should we do? And then all of a sudden, because of that, I think I ended up like sort of gaffer taping the iPhone, because we had a performance. Like, you think, what are we doing? Well, I'm going to live stream it. So you just end up with this ad hoc gaffer tape in the moment. And because that happened, and then pretty much the day after, the government announced we're all closing down. And I think and then within a few days, I've got the FT and the Guardian like on the phone as if I'm some sort of genius, like IT, digital G. So of course that was a thing also that gave you a momentum. Like I wrote that for 2 or 3 weeks, answering these articles and why did we do it? And you're literally just responding in the moment. Shit, no one's coming. We need to close. Gaffer tape. Can we do it? WhatsApp live. So that was an interesting thing. And then after 2 weeks, you're like, well, actually, I'm at home and I need to homeschool my kids. And we ended up just having this very different experience.
And this is going to run for a long time.
Well, I didn't know that, but I did feel that. So actually, initially, I spent some time, because we were subscribing to platforms like Artsy, and we sort of had this presence. So in a moment, like there was a project that I was really proud of, which was called 21 Days, where we would invite non-profits. So we worked with 650 Mar from Brighton, Hove. We worked with Slugtown from Newcastle. So these sort of artist-run platforms, which we hosted their works and would sell their works through Artsy. We'd host an exhibition with them every 21 days, and then all the profits would go straight to those guys. That was really great. And that gave us a lot of press in that instance, because for me, I was already paying a subscription for Artsy. I'm already using it. Why can't we invite these other people to kind of use that? And then maybe because of the things I was reading about, climate change, politics, neoliberalism, the problems with capitalism, I sort of started to have these ideas. I sat down actually with my accountant and explained all these ideas to him, and he told me,
That's a good test for ideas.
Yeah, and then he said, well, it sounds like, because what was important also before that was that I do work with a lot of artists, Jeremiah Day, John Altai, many and others, that do have socially engaged and politically engaged practices. Maria Kadyrova, they kind of all do. And we were doing, you do something at Tate Modern, great, and you're chasing it at Pompidou. And then I always felt a bit empty afterwards, that we weren't actually making and manifesting any real social impact or change. So I think those two things, that it allowed me to think about those things. And Jeremiah Day's PhD, which we're about to publish, very much looked about how art's role in civic life could have, could be more engaged somehow. And actually the show we have now at Flat Time House, you know, John Latham's legacy of art and civic life, and, you know, and him having dialogue with Stephen Hawking, John Lennon, Noam Chomsky, you know, mixing all these kind of radical ideas. So I sat down with the accountant and explained all this stuff. And then it was he that said, well, why don't you close the limited company and open a CIC? And I said, what's the CIC? And he explained what a CIC was. And then,
can you say what CIC is for anyone?
CIC stands for Community Interest Company. So it's a for-profit company, but it's a for-profit good. You have to identify where your surplus profits will go. So, for example, if all the energy companies were CIC, then potentially, rather than like four big, like fat white guys having tens of millions of quid in a bank, you might have 50 new community centres, 6 youth clubs, 20 hospitals. So I really got to understand, because I'm not interested in huge profits. I'm just interested because the value of what we do is in the work that we do. So explain that to me. And I said, when it's explained to me, I said, well, why doesn't everyone do that? And he said, well, you can't take more a salary in excess of £80,000 a year. I was like, that's the fucking dream anyway. That's and then it made me realize that a lot of the time when younger generation of people opening galleries, like, there is this golden carrot, that thing that's always there, which very rarely kind of materializes anyway. So we closed a limited company and opened a CIC, and I felt that now I was in a position to seek investment, and it would be investment from the right people. It wouldn't be a hedge fund manager in Zurich who's like, you have to work with this artist, they're hot, cream that, and then as soon as they're hot, drop it and get the next one. I wasn't interested in that. So it was something more long term. So, and then the COVID, didn't it, went on for like however long that was.
2 years.
And so at the moment, we still haven't, because the first thing that we did after COVID, we went to our first fair in Turin in late November 21. We had our first exhibition in collaboration with Flat Time House, because I'd also decided that, so where should my new gallery premises be? Because the lease came up for the one in Barbican since 2000. That came up in COVID. It was like, I've been there 15 years. Let's let it go and find something new. Of course, I didn't know that this thing would go on and on and on. And the original exhibition that we did with Anna Barham at Flat Time House was because I decided that I wanted to be in Peckham. I live in walking distance to Flat Time House. I had a good alliance and a relationship with them. And it was really about, I felt that I wanted the new project, like, whether you want to call it Arcade 2.0, to go back to local and then build a base and then come out and go global again. I felt that, you know, because there were, you know, I've been running around the world for 15 years. I remember also doing 3 fairs back to back. I was in Mexico, then I went to Madrid, and then went to New York. I was just like, what are we doing? So deciding to be in Peckham locally, because also I felt that if you want to manifest and have an impact in society, you have to do it and expand in your community. And I've since met and building a relationship. There's a local mental health charity called the Nest near in Peckham. There's the neurodiverse artist studio Into Art, and it's really working out how we can all complement as well. Partnerships for a strong foundation, but also to share and exchange skills. So what the idea was to originally, when we had the show at Flat Time House with Gareth and Anna Barham, was supposed to be a platform. So like we have the show, it's a really great show. And also it was important that like Anna's research was, she was researching a lot of John Latham, you know, the things fitted, the artistic value was really strong. And that was really important. But also it's supposed to be a base where we could invite potential investors. We could say like, this is what we're doing. We're looking for a new space. This is our community. This is where we are. But sadly, Omicron, like, I was just like, and then I'd been quite robust throughout COVID, robust psychologically, robust.
Yeah.
And I think that that took its toll, like that sort of knocked me out. So then it's almost like we're back there now, like November 21, that's a long time ago, isn't it?
Yeah, it's 2023.
So we're trying to do that journey again. And maybe I feel a little more patient as well now, because maybe it takes quite a while to unwind from the speed or the speed of expectation.
So are you saying that maybe, well, do you think you were less rooted in the community where the gallery was previously? And that one thing that you maybe learned in COVID or just wanted to do is to actually have a gallery that's really rooted in the community in which it sits?
I think one thing, to be truly rooted in your community, because that's what we really struggled with Brussels, was that, but also that happened in COVID. So you couldn't, because we're not a gallery that really just sends out loads of JPEGs and you're selling things. Like it doesn't, it's like people get to understand, in a lot of the work is quite maybe difficult, not opportunity. Like, you need to spend and invest time to appreciate and understand it. But it occurred to me that, and also because I have kids, they would go to school, and actually as soon as the kids went to school, and it's my wife Anna that said it to me, she said, wow, we feel like we've re-entered into society. Because as artists and galleries, well, I just existed in that world.
Yeah,
I didn't have, like, I mean, I did long for when I'd go and hang out with my like mates post, you know, and actually they would still take the piss out of me for what they didn't understand what I do. And but maybe the kids going to school, and then you meet doctors, social workers, just meet these different people. And then I realized that's a community, that's a thing. And you, even having the gallery, whether it's in Brussels or Barbican, I don't think you can live and work in the same place. Like with politics, like, you know, the best politicians, they all live within their communities and their constituencies. I think the economist Gary Stevenson, when he was talking about the economy, was very much like, you know, there's so much theory that goes on in colleges, and theory and economics and this and that, and everyone's getting it wrong. All I need to do is walk down my mum's high street to tell you what's going on. Like that, like for me, I started to just understand that that's what we wanted to understand. But also maybe I was fortunate in the sense that I live near Peckham. Not only does it have these institutions that I've already mentioned, one of the, like, Flat Time House is such a spread, like, so maybe I was fortunate in that way that there is already a strong sense of ethnic diversity, community. I think it's quite robust against too much gentrification. Like, I lived in a long time in Brick Lane and saw the way that went, but that was a kind of more open, empty warehouse, this kind of, I think Peckham's like pretty robust. So hopefully the sourdough avocado crew mixes with the fresh yams and that kind of stuff. I hope so.
I think a nice thing about Peckham is that it's actually far away from anywhere else. I think that the issue with East London is that it's so close to the city. So actually what's happening is that its city has these huge appetites that keep swallowing areas like Brick Lane and Shoreditch, etc., etc.
Because of the young professionals, wealthy
Exactly.
young professionals.
Exactly.
Yeah.
In a way, Peckham is in that sense is kind of away from that sort of center. So maybe it has more opportunity to just kind of, as you say, like to be this dough that's kind of.
It is, and it's just so vibrant. Like you just come out of the station and it's Dutch wax and vegetable, like, and I really think that, you know, if I have this, you know, when we have the exhibition, I'm really excited about bringing clients, like, you know, whether they come from Holland Park or the Hamptons, to like, and not have that thing where the car just pulls up outside and you just like.
Where you fetishize that.
Yeah, and I'm aware that we're not on safari either, like that, because I work with a private members club in town, and I hang work, run an arts program and things there, which is very important for me to have this more bourgeois, how do you say, more this different place to then
a network, really.
Yeah, to have the network, and then of course there are those more curious people that want to. Because I remember a really influential collector from Brussels. Like I participated in Art Brussels, but there was this other fair that was really interesting called Propositions, which actually was a bit like your kind of Sunday or Zoo in London, but also it mixed institutions with commercial gallery. Like we ended up sharing a kind of big room with Vlieshal from the Netherlands. And I phoned this guy and I was like, I'm quite interested in Propositions. What do you think about it? And he said, well, depends what you want to show. If you want to show the same old shit that everyone else wants, then you go to Art Brussels. But if you want to show something that's a little more edgy, difficult, expansive, non-domestic, then you show at Proposition. Because even if you show that work that you wanted to show at this off fair at Brussels, the people aren't going to come and look at your booth anyway. And then I was like, yeah, because not everyone is going to come to Peckham. There are, because the kind of work that we show, which is brilliant, not everyone likes that stuff. They find it maybe so I felt that those people that wanted to follow what you do are adventurous enough in their tastes that they're adventurous enough to come to Peckham, if that makes sense, right?
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, it almost justifies the notion that you're not going to be using Peckham as a, fetishizing that. That's
an important point. I'm really sensitive to that. Like I said, it's not this safari. Oh, look at how the others live. Like, nah, that's, yeah.
That's a really interesting thing to think about and explore. Like on one hand, you're mentioning the private club in Mayfair or St. James's or something, and then on the other hand, you're balancing.
Well, the best example of that was when the coalition, like the eco coalitions from Greenpeace, Friends of the Earth, XR occupied Westminster. I spent a lot of time there. I'm part of some networks that do some activism, and I was suited and booted. And I went to the private members club for a meeting in the morning, and then I walked to St. James's and went and joined the local XR group and had a flag in the afternoon. And I did feel like I was uncomfortable at the time.
Where were you uncomfortable? In which place? Or just in general?
No, in my head.
Oh, in your head, okay.
And actually, when I went to the club, it was reassuring because I still had the flag. So I felt like I wanted to push. I wanted to antagonize. I had an XR, like, that's antagonistic. And I went into the club and I put it, I was like, and actually the guy behind the desk, Jack, straight away was like, oh, amazing. I hope to join at the weekend. And that's the response I want, because maybe the weekend before it was all about the coronation. So it was just different, so the week before it was all Union Jacks. And then like the week after, I'm bringing in this XR flag into this kind of
I guess freedom still costs something. To be able to do what you want, you still have to.
Well, it's an illusion for most people. There's no freedom. They can't afford to do what they want to do. They can't choose the job they want to do. They don't get paid enough for the job they want to do. It's an illusion.
I was talking to Christine Tierney from New York, the gallerist, as well, a few days ago, and she was saying how she has to sell a Picasso in a back room in order to show the work of Victor Bergin or something, some work that maybe doesn't get, well, that sometimes will just sit there for years before an institution decides to purchase it, maybe.
Yeah, that's how it works. I mean, I wish I don't really, but that would help me if I also dealt in the secondary market. That's a common
way of doing
business structure, isn't
it?
it?
In some way, I guess you are doing that, maybe not by dealing in the secondary market, but you still have an element of your, I don't know, can we call it practice, where you deal with, well, as you say, like the private club and.
Yeah, there has to be, because there's a strange thing. Like, one thing happened once, like the space that we had on Lever Street was small, and it's an old shop, ground floor.
Yeah.
You open the door, you walk in, you're in the show.
That's it. Yeah.
And I remember, I can't remember who it was, but maybe it's a New York couple, and I'd met them at a fair, and they came to the gallery, and I remember the guy just walked straight in, and he walked straight through right to the back of the office, waiting to find the Kunsthalle.
Yes.
And then I was like, no, this is it. And then that got me thinking about, because obviously when I'm at the fair, like, let's say I'm opposite Nordenhaker, we both have 60 square meters. We both showing museum represented artists, and so they expect me to have multiple venues in Mexico, Berlin, so the club, I realized, was also a place that when you do come to London, it was just a moment to have it. It's not about validation. It was more to have the time for them to just put those goggles on, or take that tablet, or just slow down, mate. Just like, we'll have a glass of champagne here. This is this and this, and yeah, I suppose it is a type of validation. I was reluctant to say that because it's uncomfortable, isn't it, to have to be validated by wealth.
Yeah. So is the new space in progress, or?
I'm looking for a space. We had because I'd focused on Peckham, I think I realized that made it really difficult, because I think if you're looking in London, or at least like East, where there's a lot more on the market, but there's not things available, because we're often doing, as you imagine, gallery dinners, like hospitality for our clients and things, and we're going to build a kitchen so that we can do that in the gallery. So we had an idea that through meeting like the local mental health charity, the Nest, and the chef Marko is also very conscientious that he wants a change. He wants some better, inclusive, shared sort of things. So the idea was to, we could have Wednesday night, we could have a supper club where I invite my clients. Thursday night, we have a ticketed supper club for locals, where I give them a tour of the show and eat the food. But then Monday, Tuesday lunchtime, we can run cooking school for local kids.
Yeah.
So this balance, because actually that goes back to galleries. You're open, let's say you're open even generously, like Tuesday to Saturday, 12 till 6. And you're paying extortionate rent, like what's happening in the evening. So at Lever Street, traditionally we'd close in August, and I'd just give the keys to, one year there were some Slade students, did some shows, one year some non-profit. And also it was that thing of, I have this asset, it's already paid for. Maybe like, do you want to do yoga one night? Do you want to do, so not for money, but just I'm already paying for it and it's empty. So it was also about, well, if I'm going to be paying this extortionate amount of money for this space, then we want it used all the time. And a great curator friend, Scott Burrell, who works for the Peabody, on these social projects in Bexley Heath. When I met with him and some ideas, like he got it. He was like, oh, I'd be like that thing of what Gordon Matt Clark was running, Soup in New York, or more recently in Peckham DIY. And then he was like, yeah. And then one time, oh, all of a sudden you could just have a skate park in the basement bit. And it was like, yeah, that's what I'm talking about. So I think there's a lot of these ideas that are all flitting around. And I think the going and engaging with a space that I couldn't afford, it was the catalyst for some of these things for me to start, adjust a business plan, write it all out. How are we going to do that? So it was useful. I don't have the space, but
but actually you've got more options now in a way. Like you have to like expand your approach to how you could work. Or
yeah, because the dinners, the things, because also what we wanted to do was, you know, we've had some really successful situations where it's that thing of getting your audience to slow down and participate.
Mm-hmm.
And we invited the artist Chiara Camoni from Italy, and she came to my home, and we did a clay whistle making workshop where some clients came, some curators, some press, some friends, and we all sat down, we had a drink, a tea, and we had some soup after, and we all made clay whistles. That engagement with that curator museum, they then acquired that suite of works for that, that's the process. Mm-hmm. So the hospitality, well, look what House and Worth are doing on this whole other scale. They're running fucking pubs, hotel, so it's similar to what we want to do, but on a smaller scale, because we're doing it anyway. You know, I'd have an opening, it'd cost a grand to have dinner.
Yeah.
And mostly the dinners that you go to, I'm a bit of a snob. Like, it's mostly not very good food. A lot of the dinners that I was doing with Marko, all of my high net worth individuals, clients that would come, they'd all want his phone number afterwards. And I was like, these guys are going to fucking, these guys are going to all these places and they want Marko's number.
Yeah.
So it just proved also that what we had real quality.
Yeah, that's amazing. What I thought was interesting is that, well, you talk a lot about gallery as a business. I guess I had this question about, at what point do you realize that you're a facilitator? And maybe this could take us back to, you know, what you thought you would be, maybe when you studied sculpture.
Yeah, I wanted to be an artist like everyone else. Yeah.
And then at what point did you realize you're a facilitator, and how did you become comfortable with that?
Well, as a student, I did study sculpture, and I was always obsessed with the romance of like 20s Paris, 50s New York, like these kinds of, even anecdotes of, you know, these things of, you know, that community of people and ideas. And then I think it was just, I got a job in a gallery, thinking that was the way in. And I just liked working in the gallery. I like answering the phone. I just liked I just liked that more. I didn't really ever have a burning, because I know what it's like of how, you know, living with an artist. And it's not quite a melancholy, but when they're not pushing, they're not themselves. I didn't have that. So I ended up working in the gallery, and it was a classic, you know, send out your CV, go knocking on the door, like feeling like about an inch tall for all day. And then, you know, eventually something kind of happened. And then I worked there for 6 years. So I just understood that, actually. But there's a really embarrassing, like one of the few things that was published, an interview, was that, and it goes into this thing that you're saying, and my wife takes the mick out of me about it, is that there was a part of I went to University of Westminster, and someone afterwards was wanting to interview alumni about what they were doing, and I was quoted as saying, "I don't make art, I make it happen." And that's like an embarrassing, but that's what you're on about, you know, that's that thing.
Interesting. Why is that embarrassing?
I don't know, because it just sounds, maybe because Anna would have like teased me about it, but it was a bit embarrassing. But it's a good question, like, why is that embarrassing? I think it's just that thing that it's so self-important, isn't it?
Yes, yes. You're
No,
justifying your
when
position.
yeah, but the facilitator for sure.
I mean, it's something, the reason why I asked this question is because I myself, I love drawing, painting, making. I mean, I'm an architect, so I teach architecture, right? But in that, there is a lot of that. There's a lot of drawing, there's a lot of making. But, at some point I realized maybe I need to develop a language or a practice. The thing is, one thing when you study architecture, even though it's especially in a place like the Architectural Association, which is quite a progressive place that does allow individual development of sort of individual language, is still learning to be part of a profession, right? So, but then I've also done a lot of this, speaking and to people, and I have a good friend in New York who's actually an incredible artist. And over the past few years, her practice has really transitioned from being a painter to really being a facilitator, being almost like an activist, a very politically engaged work. And she would tell me, you just have to accept that you're a facilitator, that you're very good at facilitating. So I think that's why I'm trying to explore this.
But I never wanted to be an artist. Like, I think I wasn't very attentive at school. I was good at drawing, so you go to art school. Like, it wasn't a big plan of, I was maybe lazy at school, or I didn't often attend school, or you end up being quite good at snooker and darts or whatever. So I think it was, perhaps, although I might be reluctant to admit, it felt like an easy option because I was just good at drawing and things. But it was really difficult. Like, I did a BTEC in art and design in Torquay, which was brilliant. But it wasn't straightforward even to get into that. And then in Westminster, I didn't get in. I had to go through clearing. I remember phoning up every day, sending gifts to the administrators saying, let me, hi, it's me again. Hey, Jill, is that Jill? Hi. So I wasn't even, I'd get in by the skin of my teeth. And actually that wasn't a brilliant experience that I thought it would have in the sense of community. I thought I wanted to go to Black Mountain College, but that wasn't, but there were people there like Keith Wilson who did have this left field view of thinking and talking about things, which actually at the time when I was 20 or whatever old, I didn't really understand what he meant, but I did process it later. So maybe at the time it is a bit of an influence of what you do. But actually when I left uni, I lived in like South Africa, and I lived in Utrecht for 9, like I just went and just got jobs. I wasn't ready to quite like be an adult, like get a job sort of thing. But maybe you it wasn't hard for me to let go of being an artist. I don't ever think I was an artist.
Yeah, but it's not so much letting go, but becoming comfortable with, well, I call it becoming comfortable, but I think realizing that because artist is very inwardly, and gallerist has to be very outwardly. It is different. It is different.
For sure, but I'm gregarious and adventurous and curious. And
so do you think maybe, do you see yourself as a curator?
I don't see myself as anything. Like, I don't think about that. If you're fixing the toilet, you're a plumber. If you're fixing I'll do any. So I don't. But we do. I do. Like, what does that even mean? Like, if you look it up in a dictionary, it means that you look after objects in a museum. Like, so.
Well, you are looking after loads of objects, clearly.
Or not.
Or not, yeah.
Yeah, but it's interesting how I don't use that word a lot, really. I wouldn't ever say curate, but I'm not reluctant to use it, a curator.
Well, what does a curator do? I guess you speak to a lot of curators, or you encounter a lot of curators, or artists encounter a lot. I mean,
yeah, I think I'm more of an artist than a curator. Like, it was an interesting experience with the shows that we made in Brussels, because there was a really strong following of artists, and someone in particular that became kind of a good friend and was really supportive is Gabriel Curry. And he really saw, like, he would always ask, he'd come into a show and he'd always ask, whose decision was it to do that? Whose decision? Like, and I said, well, it's our decision. Like, it was me, you have a conversation with the artist, or it was me, I decided to do that. So is that a curator or is that an artist? And when I say decided to do that, it might be to paint that wall that color. Or I remember once there was a return on a wall, and I wanted this corner of these two paintings of equal size to have a symmetry. So I just hung the painting hanging off the edge of the wall, which is a ridiculous thing maybe to do, but actually it just, once you've done it, it was perfect. But you wouldn't ever think to do, like, to have a painting half hanging off the edge of a wall, right? Like, but it was the only way for them to fit equally hinged on a thing. So it was only really with someone coming, like Gabriel, coming to the gallery to ask those questions, that you're aware of them. At the time, you just know you want those two paintings to hinge. You're not trying to be radical. You're not like, oh, we're gonna like change the rules of the white cube, or it's just that looks better there.
That makes sense.
So I really value the input of that community of people that would come and make those comments. Yeah. Like when people come to the shows, maybe go back to earlier, you need the feedback, don't you, to not just a slap on the back, but like to actually realize what you've done. Because also I do a lot of things my own, and actually at the moment I am working on my own. My dear colleague Caterina Vitagno, that I worked closely with in London, I think, classic COVID, she went back initially for what we think will be 1 month, and then she stayed, like, and it is like, what the hell? But maybe if you are driving the van, making the tea, taking the rubbish out, meeting the collector, organising the dinner, you don't have opportunity to reflect. And in fact, since closing the space in Brussels in December and being here at home, not traveling, working on something, the amount of ideas and things you can have, or even just to pick up a book, a contacts book from 2015, and it just made me also realize that you've got to get off the hamster. All you're doing, you're not like, you've already got all these resources that you've collected over this time. It's time to spend to research and to look at them, go through your database, all of this other stuff that like I felt like I had a lot of time. I do though feel it's not inadequate, it's not the right word, but because I think I've been so busy, and then all of a sudden you have time to do this, then you're conscientious of the fact that, oh, I'm not doing enough, like, oh, I need to be doing this or that, when actually what the stuff that I'm doing now is the stuff that maybe there wasn't enough time dedicated to that. What's the point of spending 20 grand and 10 days away at an art fair if you're not processing and analyzing the data collect? No
when you say you're not you're not a curator, you're nothing, maybe you're an artist, but when I read the premise of Arcade, it feels philosophical. It feels like there is a framework that you establish within which you then produce. culture or whatever it's called. Maybe I'm just missing all the terminology, but
culture is good. That'll do. That is the right word, I think.
I mean, there is thinking on a quite a profound level that sets I'm drawn to saying a philosophical framework within which you can operate.
Yeah, I mean, that's just personal. I am aware that I don't want my own cultural endeavors relative to my own ego to get in the way of my job of foregrounding, platforming the artists that I work with, if that makes sense. Like, I'm kind of constantly aware of that. But also I thought that art is supposed to be like progressive and challenging. And as soon as I got into the business of it, I was like, well, it's not progressive or challenging. Everyone's website looks the same set of 3 publishers design the same books. Like, everything just goes through the same process. So I wanted that to be different, and I hoped that that's a positive thing that people are attracted to. And I think maybe what's been missing is this opportunity to articulate the story. Because when I do have these conversations with someone like yourself, people out there are interested in challenging, progressive things, whether it's a gallery, an exhibition, a book, a record, whatever it might be. So where that philosophy comes from, or I don't know, really. But also, what's your job, Like, you do have a responsibility, because there was a time when and Jeremiah Day reminded me of it when we were just building the show just now. But there was something about, like, I felt the need for the politics to be foregrounded. In fact, it changed when I'd been in Chicago and I've met some people from Human Rights Watch, and a lot of these people were art collector patrons, but they also do, and I got a bit involved with those conversations. And then I was in Amsterdam, and I think it was MacGarry Gallery. And before I walked into the show, they had a human rights sticker on the window. And I was like, yeah, that's what we like. It's a thing of a reminder, so people not like, oh, look at this, and blah. You're constantly in check, like, okay, yeah, fuck, there's someone being persecuted in there. There's a Syrian refugee. Like, I thought it was important to have this check. You can still enjoy culture and hospitality and what you want to do, but it seemed that we had to, as privileged Westerners or whatever you want to, like, there just had to be some reminder. I think having kids also gets you thinking about their future. But the example of the human rights sticker and that Gallery, I was like, well, what can I do? So we started to, with the homepage of the gallery, use that as a political space. So when Colin Kaepernick thing kicked off, for instance, I was really impressed by that kind of process, story, bravery. We started to put Colin Kaepernick on the homepage. But what I was also interested in was visual aesthetics. Now, the San Francisco 49ers just happened to have red uniforms. Our identity at the time was red. So for me, it went back into a cultural aesthetic design reference, just red. And then when Stormzy called out Boris Johnson when he won the Brit Award, we hosted Stormzy as an image. He had a red Adidas tracksuit. So I was still looking through a lens of aesthetics and design and things, whilst trying to have a political message that might be like a subliminal frame in a Kenneth Anger movie, where you don't, like, you go to the website and maybe people don't know, like, it doesn't say Colin Kaepernick or fuck Boris or what, it doesn't. But I wanted it to have this subliminal thing that people would carry away with them. But then, of course, one of the artists on the gallery did write, because maybe I was getting a bit too political on Twitter. And they had a bit of a problem with that, which actually I haven't had a conversation directly with them about that, which I'd be interested to, because like the ideology of the white cube is about this hermetic neutral space, and I'm not interested so much in, you know, I wanted to maybe go back to the civic life, John Latham, Fred Dewey, you kind of want it to have a bit more impact out in the real world.
So sure, there is all this art, and there's all this art that you're showing, and that informs how you think and what you want to show and say and do, and what you want to cross-reference, etc. But are there any other things that influence your? I mean, you mentioned reading a lot of politics, so political theory and writing on, I guess, globalization and geopolitics and things like that. Is there anything in film or music that really is an important part of your thinking?
I can get obsessed with something. Like it was only through the documentary Wild Combination that I really got to know who Arthur Russell was. And then as soon as I watched that, and then I watched that 50 like over and over and cried and was happy. And then all of a sudden I bought everything you could possibly buy to read about Arthur Russell, all of the records, made a show at the gallery, Loose Joints, like, and it was the same with Ridley Walker, with Russell Hoban. When I read that, I was obsessed with that, because also I'm not someone who reads a lot of books, certainly not novels. So I read a lot of biographical, I don't read a lot. So obviously that must have some sort of longer term influence. But actually at the time, because a dear friend of mine, Richard King, is actually publishing, or maybe I shouldn't say, he's publishing kind of like an archival book of Arthur Russell, and he's been back and forward to New York, going through Arthur Russell's archive and talking to some people that used to do music. Like, so I think I'm interested in this romance. And in fact, I remember being with a friend, an artist friend, and maybe I was reading the Frank Zappa bio, and she said, why do you want to read about what everyone else is doing? And that is an interesting question, right? I was always interested in also how outsiders or underdogs, because these people actually, I remember Russell Hoban, Frank Zappa, Arthur, they weren't like, they were the freaks. And actually they did actually want to use their platforms to sort of speak their politics too, right? Or their moral and philosophical views. So yeah, Ridley Walker, Arthur Russell. Most recently, I discovered this Netflix documentary called Barbaric Genius about John Healey. And then I straight away just read the book. So at the minute, I'm kind of obsessed with John Healey.
You know, the reason why I ask this is because I do feel a strong sense of what maybe somewhat, even though you don't want to define it as curator, but you've actually even explained through the example of Arthur Russell how that even informed the work and then the gallery did. I mean, it's quite interesting that.
But you know what it is, maybe as well.
You are doing that. You are weaving things.
Yeah, but also when you're working with a community of artists, your priority is always to foreground their work. So it's always that would come first. And then so the idea that, like, I wouldn't curate, maybe at one extreme you've got your kind of Nicholas Bourriard relational aesthetics, ultra-mod, like but I would just be like, oh, that looks good together. Like, it's not something. And if we did curate a show, I would curate a show at the gallery. Like when we did the Ridley Walker show, it was called Follery and Folleroo, and the accompanying text was the song in the book. We did a show, like, I'm a bit of a jazz fan, especially Art Blakey. We did a show, A Night in Tunisia, and then the accompanying text was a playlist. So maybe because I don't write, and in fact I have to thank friends that I do write, but I'll just and then I'll send it to my really brilliant friends, and then they word it. Yeah. So, but it was also yeah, because maybe the curation thing for me was more in depth. Like, I think I wouldn't be able to get a job in an institution because I'm not sure I'd be able to write the catalogue essay
Mhm.
or not. I don't know, but maybe that's not what it's about.
Maybe
I
you
don't
could
know.
say it and then it gets transcribed.
Yeah, just phone a friend. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I think really important question is, how is your, I feel inclined to call it practice, maybe it can be called practice, I don't know, but how is the gallery a response to what you encountered in the art world? And in a way, how does it challenge some of the difficulties that you might have identified in that world, which isn't perfect like any other world?
How does it challenge? Uh, I'll think of an example, and you can sort of get, maybe an example might be that because we work a lot with artists that don't necessarily make objects, they always make it like, but there's a that we started to, because like performance kind of has got a lot more attention in the last sort of 10 years. And I was a bit frustrated maybe how it was always this secondary thing in present, whether it's a museum or an art fair. So we started to literally just do the performances. They were just in the booth. It wasn't like, so in that sense, that was an element of sort of challenging, like everyone's walking around looking at painting. I was like, well, why can't, what you should be doing, not only should you be watching his performance for 20 minutes, but actually you should be looking at that painting for 20 minutes. Or like there's this thing about how the timings of things changed. Another small thing dawned on me was that this sort of structure of like the Tuesday to Saturday 12 till, you know, this thing of like, and then the
Yes, it's
website,
already mentioned, yeah.
you know, this like artist info, like it was always like, but I do realize that I did slip into that very quickly. But there was an opportunity once when we hosted an exhibition, which was sculptures with candles, and I was reluctant to black out the space because of this nature of when you enter straight into it and there's not an antechamber, and like didn't quite work. So I was like, oh, sod it, we just opened the gallery from 2 till 8. So that's a simple thing, but I quite enjoyed that, and that just made sense. And yeah, it made me think, oh wow, what, or can't we just open the gallery sometimes? Because I remember one morning, maybe in the early days, like I said, maybe you've got a job, you know, I'd often be in there early, like 5, 6, 8, you know, you're doing stuff. And I saw a client jog past, and I was like, all of a sudden, oh, can't we open Tuesday mornings at 6? And the client, you know, like, so that's what you're asking, right? Like, how do you
That's a really interesting angle, actually. Yeah.
so you just use the environment and what's brilliant about the sun and how you feel, and like we all feel different seasonally, we feel different night. Imagine going out, because what is it on the radio yesterday, like Banksy's opening at Goma, and the journalist, I forget his name, the cultural journalist, and he said, oh brilliant, so you can, and because Banksy's open all night in Goma.
Okay, yeah.
He was like, oh, so you can go up, and stupidly he said fly to Glasgow. That annoyed me. I was like,
Okay.
don't fly to Glasgow.
You take a train.
Train. But he said you can go clubbing, and then you can go and see the Banksy show. Like I really quite like that, where things can be open all hours, and that's one of the many exciting things about having the show now at Flat Time House. It's a house. People live in the house. Upstairs, artists, residences. There's a kitchen. I cook lunch. Like there's this thing also where you can inhabit. So I'm really interested actually, if the space retail doesn't present itself, it'd be great to just find a house and start to make project. I really like that sense of also how you can receive and accommodate people, because that goes back to that ideology of the white called this hermetic. I don't believe so much in that. but maybe that also goes back to, you know, John Latham 8, the Clement Greenberg art and culture, you know, like those things are supposed to be pushed against. So I hope, yeah, I was just saying, I hope that that somehow answers.
It does, it really does. And I do have one more important question, which is one of the key questions, and that is, how do you recognize an artist that you want to work with, or how do you recognize art that you want to engage with? That's also
often you meet the people, because especially if they're younger, which actually we don't work with so many younger, but it was more the people, because it's about an intensity or a passion or something that they had in the message that they wanted to convey. Like I don't really go around, I don't often go to degree shows and stuff. I will if I can for personal curiosity, but I'm never like looking what's the next hottest thing, because next week's hot thing is next year's cool thing. Like that's not, an artist have to be able to make a shit second album or not, or so that's kind of difficult. But most of the people I've met is through other artists that I already work with.
How did you meet the first artists, or how did you get to the first artists?
Jeremiah Day was the first artist. I met Jeremiah because his wife was at residency at Delphina, and I met him, and he's intense, and I offered him a show in a gallery that I didn't have, and that's where the name Arcade comes from, because when I went to Amsterdam and I'd already realized I didn't want my name on the thing. When I walked to his studio from Central Station, there was just this big, beautiful, old, rusting neon, like the neon, but with the casing, like Arcade, A-R-C, just vertically. And then that became the identity for the gallery. So it was like a, like, it's not Walter Benjamin, not Pac-Man, it was just, it's a found object. So I met Jeremiah, and it made me realize that, you know, at that time, you know, more recently, he's worked with a lot with Simone Forti in the improvisational dance, storytelling, this kind of practice. He wasn't doing that when I met him. I think you have to also realize that what an artist is doing then, let's hope they're not doing that in 10 years, you know, because that's not art, right? Or like no one, if you're a musician, you can't release that first album again. But in art, it seems like that's all people want you to do. Sort of a weird thing. So I think it's important that the other artists enjoy, respect the other, because you do want to build this community, that because also you want to engage them in dialogue to help to nurture to each one's kind of research and things. You want that to have an impact. That's been brilliant, because often they become friends, often a lot of them kind of also sort of teaching, they're inviting each other to participate in, you know, so that respect was really important. When I met Clive Hodgson, that's the difference. I didn't meet Clive actually. I always wanted a Clive Hodgson painting. I really like his paintings, and he was a big fan actually of Anna's work. So initially, I was trying to get Anna to swap, like, oh, you should do a swap Clive. And in the end, I worked like with Clive, which is great. But I remember being in a taxi with Luca Bertolo, an brilliant Italian painter that I've worked with since the beginning. And I just mentioned this name, and then he went straight away, oh my God, I love his work. Like, and that is actually, initially it's a relief, because also maybe your own judgment, you're a bit sensitive, shit, is this, like, you're not sure if it's right or good or something. So that's reassuring. And in fact, if I am looking at a new painter, which I am at the moment, I've been looking at a few that I really follow and like, I have that conversation with the painters of the gallery, and I really enjoy that feedback, and I think they want that too, some you know, in terms of having a discourse. So that's great. Yeah, I think that's how.
So it's almost like, you know, which one comes first, the artist or the artwork?
But also the art, like the art changes. I didn't think of that obvious analogy now about making records, but the market, the audience, actually maybe they do want the same thing, because, you know, it's like, you know, the Stone, you know, the audience is shouting, do that number, and all they want to do is play their new stuff. So there is actually that thing where they want, you know.
I guess that's what the artist needs to resist, or still be able to transcend the audience. And
in a way, and actually this thing that does complement that is that when an artist like is in the studio, it's always pushing, like whether it's John Finneran, and he was painting on aluminium, and it was really interesting that he said just one day, he said, I nailed it, I got the stroke, I got the thing, boom, I moved on. It was it's like the drawing, what I wanted to learn, could have been an instrument, could have been playing violin. He's like, I've nailed that, and like gone on, you know, and started to play saxophone. I'm not quite, but maybe just it was a piece of music. So, you know, I find all of the artists I work with really progressive in that way. But there is something about when you're exhibiting works, and often artists always want to show the new stuff. But in fact, if they've only had the show in London, if there's a show in Brussels, Beijing, or somewhere, like, I'm always like, no, we want to show, because for me, they're like chapters in books, or the romance of a retrospective, the way it narrates a chronology of work. And I'm like, no, let's always, so as well as, like, I think the studio should be progressive, but maybe the exhibiting chronology, it's important, I think, that it doesn't go too far ahead. You have to, there's no point just.
Yeah, I remember when I saw David Hockney's exhibition at the Tate, that I was just like, this is for an artist of that magnitude, right? The way that he sort of moved on from those flat elevational paintings from the early career, they could I mean, he could have just kept making that and selling that for millions, right? That he just, you know, like watercolor flowers. I mean, that's just, I just thought that's just so commendable, you know.
I think you have to. But it's like, it can also be infuriating, because the show we made at the moment, I picked, and actually some practices are, let's say, because they're heavily research based, they're ongoing. So the project that we're presenting now at Flat Time House started in 2008. And also because I know the artist practice, I was like, because also I want to know what the parameters of the project is, because then I can record it, market it. I can start to have my ideas about how to share it with the world, whether it's through the show, through the press release, through this stuff. But of course, the artists always want to, like, oh, I want to change. And in fact, I had an old work, because at Flat Time House, it's great at the back. I have a kind of viewing space to show other artists' work. It's brilliant. And there was a work of, I hope he doesn't mind. Yeah, of course. And, you know, it had some text on it. And he came in and just got some tape and put the tape on the text. I was like, oh, I don't want that anymore. And that's kind of nice, you know, for me. That was kind of
nothing you can say about that. I mean, it's an artist's work.
No, well, you can say what you want about whether it's wrong or right.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
But also there was something about this, like, pristine photograph mounted on aluminium, like, because I do like thing, you know, for me that gave it an edge which I was attracted to. which a lot of audiences aren't. Like I often like something, I always say, oh, that painting, or can't you just tie it to the back of your car and just drive it around the block once and come back? Or so something that's not, and it had that edge that I was kind of excited by. But yeah, there's a balance, isn't there, between of us working together, but the gallery does have to know the edges to then have the opportunity to
because it's a commercial enterprise. That's an interesting point. How do you then frame
and not just in terms of commercial, but how we then articulate it to the audience. And what's also been brilliant about the collaboration with Flat Time House is that, you know, not only am I able to continue a program whilst looking for a space, but you've got this third entity, Gareth Bell-Jones and Mary Vitesse, the curator and director. You know, and if I've been working for Jeremiah for more than 15 years, just to have this other person who's actually, with respect, and all my younger colleagues are brilliant, but Gareth's a director of an institute, like to have that as part of the team. And in fact, because I wrote a press release, as I did earlier, Jeremiah gave it a thing, I sent it to someone, and they were like, what the fuck? Who's Stoke, and what farmers and students, like, so, and then Gareth took it and he gave it the third party. So you also get this other thing of someone's coming to it fresh. So it, like, on many levels, it's a great process.